Hello, everybody. Good evening from my home here in Bryan in my dining room. I wish I could be with you there in Odessa, but things just couldn't work out to permit me the 16-hour round trip drive this time. As you've heard, I'm a retired state district court judge, so let me tell you a little bit about the rest of the story. I was licensed to practice law about 40 years ago, and 10 years after that, I got appointed to be a trial court judge. Spent the next 30 years coming down to today serving as a trial judge, almost 20 of that as an elected judge until I reached retirement. Over that time, I have presided over something greater than about 570 jury trials. About 2/3 of those have been felony criminal trials, and 4 of them have been death penalty cases. So I have been immersed in crime professionally for a long time. But in addition to my professional connection with the world of crime and drugs, I have some personal involvement. In 1983, a man in Houston who was on probation for misdemeanor marijuana possession was on foot walking down the street in a Houston suburb and passed a house that had a little car in the driveway, and he was out of work, needed transportation, so he went to the door, gained access to the house on some pretext, and demanded that the lady of the house, the widow, hand him the car keys. She refused, and a struggle ensued. He got her keys away from her to take the car, but he also decided to strike some blows, and he wound up killing the woman with a cast iron skillet. Broke the handle off the skillet, killing this 68-year-old woman. The woman was named Ethel Delaney. That's right, it was my mother. And 13 years later, the state of Texas put that fellow to death, and I learned a lot about him along the way. And in another personal way, I'll tell you about my children. I have 2 children, 2 stepchildren. One of my daughters is a physician. Another is a lawyer and felony prosecutor. Another is a master's degree special education teacher. And the 4th child, the only boy, is addicted to drugs and alcohol. And tonight, as I speak to you, he is in our county jail, waiting transfer to a state jail facility to serve out the sentence that he plea bargained for about a week ago. He stole a computer and another item and my car from our house, all behind his addiction to drugs and alcohol. So because of my personal and professional immersion in the world of drugs and its consequences, I have every reason to be about as hard on drugs as anybody. But I'm here tonight to tell you, happily share my story with you, because I have come to believe, like Dr. Sanjay Gupta and others, that for at least 70 years we have been horribly misled in our country. And it's high time we did something about it as a people. And the good news is, we are. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about this evening. I'd like to ask you to consider a couple of images with me. You heard that I was a Navy officer for about 4 years during Vietnam. It's true. I was a sailor on a big, long, gray steel ship. But one of the things I learned in the Navy, becoming a ship driver, is that you don't stop those things on a dime. When you get a ship going 30, 40 miles an hour through the medium of water, you don't apply brakes and slide to a stop. You have to approach the business of stopping and turning in a very gradual way. And if you stop and think about that ship as an image of the ship of state, with maybe the president on top and Congress and all the other government officials up there running the place, and the crew sort of representing, and the passengers representing the people like you and me, then you'll appreciate with me the fact that public opinion changes slowly, laws change slowly, but if you persist, if the people persist, government sooner or later comes around. But it doesn't happen overnight. Well, the good news is it's happening. Another image I'd like to share with you that I learned about is in the Oval Office, the office of the President of the United States. When his office was remodeled in 2010, I read that a great big wheat-colored oval rug was placed in the office. And you can go online and see pictures of it. It's got the presidential seal. And they're elegant things. There are chairs grouped around it. But what you can't see in the picture is that there are quotations from American leaders. 4 of our most popular presidents have quotations that appear on that rug. And it occurs to me that the president walks over that rug multiple times a day and must look down and see these things. I'm told that the president's most popular, favorite quotation is on the rug, but not from a president, from another distinguished American. Martin Luther King Jr. has a quotation on that rug, and it goes like this. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Turns out that that wasn't original to Dr. King. It actually originated with a man by the name of Theodore Parker in 1853, Unitarian minister who lived in Boston and was speaking out against the evils of slavery. He died in 1860. He didn't get to see the end of slavery, but he coined this phrase about the moral universe being long but bending toward justice. Martin Luther King attributed this to Reverend Parker. And so I'd ask all of you to keep that in mind, this image of a slow bending but always toward justice. Which brings up the subject of what's called gradualism or incrementalism. My friends in the anti-drug war movement are sort of divided on this. Some, like my friend Dean Becker, who recently wrote a book called End the Drug War, argues passionately that incrementalism or gradualism is the enemy of reform. And others of us say, well, maybe not so much. Maybe we can't do anything about it. Maybe like that ship that we try hard to stop on a dime and turn around, you just can't do it. The only way to approach change, even radical change, is to apply your energy consistently, vigorously, and responsibly. And eventually things come around if you're right. And of course we believe we are. So what to do? I am here to share my view with you that I think we find ourselves today in a great position. Think back with me just a few years. In the zenith of the drug war, at its apex, when it was most powerful, in the late 1980s and 1990s, Congress was passing laws with virtually no debate that did things like expand mandatory minimums in the federal sentencing, conjuring up all kinds of collateral consequences to drug convictions that were forced on the states. We've got a law that says a state has got to revoke a person's driver's license for any drug conviction, even a modest amount of marijuana. That's a drug conviction. It's no different from a truckload of heroin. Minimum of 6 months. And if the state doesn't do it, then they lose 10% of their highway money. Now, there's a provision in there for the states to opt out. The governor sends a message and the legislature responds and says, okay, we don't want to be bound by that law, but there are not many states who have taken that tack, certainly not Texas. We now know that there are about 23 states, in the District of Columbia in America that have adopted some version of medical marijuana laws. We know that there are 18 states, and now the District of Columbia, that have reduced penalties or provided for no penalties for possession of personal amounts of marijuana. And of course, 2 states now allow for the commercial sale of recreational marijuana. First 2 jurisdictions anywhere to allow that. And interestingly, the research is showing us that in the states that adopted medical marijuana in the year after, the first year after the adoption, their highway traffic deaths went down between 9 and 11%. We know that in Colorado, since they adopted medical marijuana way back in 2009, adolescent marijuana use has actually gone down 3% while it was going up 3% around the rest of the country. So that's a 6-point swing. But the week that we're in right now has been a remarkable week, almost a watershed week. Just listen with me while we share what happened this week. In the United States Congress, a clear majority of the House of Representatives, controlled by the Republican Party, voted in favor of letting banks deal with marijuana businesses. On another front, also in Washington, this week, on July the 17th, a law became final, passed by the local council that governs the District of Columbia, that passed a very significant decriminalization law. The way this works in the District of Columbia is that when they pass a law, it becomes binding after 60 days of legislative time. The United States Congress has got 60 legislative days to reverse it. If they don't act to reverse it or modify it in some way, it becomes law. Well, on July 17th, Thursday of this week, this new law in the District of Columbia became final. The United States Congress did not act to change it, and that's terribly significant. The tide has changed so much that Congress is, in example after example, letting the states, or the District of Columbia in this case, act if they choose to liberalize our drug laws. This is an interesting law. It's kind of instructive to take apart some of its pieces. First of all, you need to know that in our nation's capital, it's still unlawful, quote unquote, to be in possession of marijuana. But for possession of 1 ounce or less, there is a $25 fine, plus the forfeiture of the marijuana and any paraphernalia that you happen to have. Interestingly, it applies to all ages, even minors under 18. But if you're under 18, they send a copy of the summons that they write, kind of like a parking ticket, to your parents. Another interesting development in this law is that police in the District of Columbia are now no longer allowed to use the smell of marijuana as a justification for search of a car or an apartment. Likewise, they're not allowed to use the presence of an unusual amount of cash or multiple numbers of containers, so long as the quantity of the marijuana that they discover is under 1 ounce. They can't use that as a justification for a further search of the car or the house. The $25 fine is called a civil fine. It means that you're not going to have a criminal record based upon that. It's still illegal to publicly consume marijuana or be impaired in a public place or on someone else's private property. That can get you a jail sentence of up to 60 days. Now, what about Texas? What's happening here in Texas as we look forward to the legislature convening in less than 6 months? We know that about 58% of Texans support medical marijuana. About 58% support the regulation and taxation of recreational marijuana sales, like in Colorado and Washington. And an even greater percentage, 61%, support a fine only and no jail time penalty for 1 ounce or less. We know that because of the polling data. But what about our politicians? What do they think? They're up there in the bridge of this big gray ship of state. Are they putting on the brakes in response to public opinion? Well, maybe. Time will tell. But listen to this very interesting quote and see if you can identify the source. This fellow said in January of this year, quote, "After 40 years of the war on drugs, I can't change what happened in the past. What I can do is to implement policies that start us toward a decriminalization that keeps people from going to prison and destroying their lives." Who would that be? That would be Governor Rick Perry. Now, he doesn't pass legislation, and he won't be in office when the legislature convenes. But what's significant to me about this, I think, is that this powerful Texas politician, who has ambitions for the presidency, has gone on record in favor of relaxing our drug laws. Maybe the legislature will drink the Kool-Aid too. And what is the Kool-Aid? Well, there is an organization out there that many of you are aware of. If you're not, I want you to know about it this afternoon. It's an organization called the Marijuana Policy Project. They have launched a multi-year campaign to reform Texas marijuana law. They have a political director, they have a lobbyist, they're prepared to spend $500,000 is the budget they've announced. They have what's been called a trifecta of laws that they want to pass. One would be medical marijuana, another would be regulation and taxation like alcohol, as in Colorado and Washington, and finally the so-called Decriminalization Law, like 18 other states have. Now, think back to the polling data I talked about a minute ago. 61% of Americans are in favor of that, and Texans too. So it could be that that's got the greatest chance. I'm going to start mentioning some names here. The fellow who has introduced this quote decriminalization law is a man named Representative Harold Dutton, D-U-T-T-O-N, a Democrat from Houston. I encourage you to Google the name, read up on this bill. What it would do is change possession of an ounce or less to a fine-only Class C misdemeanor punishable by up to $500, but no jail time. And for Class C misdemeanor, police officers in Texas have the option of arresting a person or simply writing a citation, like a traffic ticket. Now, make no mistake, this is still a criminal offense, possession of marijuana under an ounce. But remember what politics is, it's the art of the possible. This law has been introduced, I think, 5 times, and the last time in the last 2013 legislature, I was there in Austin to testify for it, along with a bevy of other people. It passed out of the House Criminal Justice Committee, was not allowed to come to a vote in the full House, but people are optimistic that it might have a chance this time. The other 2 laws, medical marijuana and full legalization and regulation, not so much. Does that mean we should give up on those? Certainly not. Well, what I want to turn to right now is what you might want to consider. What can you do to help with this big issue that we all have a common interest in? First and foremost, I think you ought to continue your education. I think you ought to go to look at the websites of organizations like the Marijuana Policy Project, the Drug Policy Alliance, an organization called the Sentencing Project, the Baker Institute at Rice University, the 2 organizations I'm most familiar with, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, or LEAP, L-E-A-P, of which I'm a member, and Drug Policy Forum of Texas, where many of my friends are members. Also, a little off the beaten path is an excellent blog about criminal law called, it's my Labrador Retriever shaking, he's impatient, he wants to go outside, I'm sorry. A blog called Grits for Breakfast, gritsforbreakfast.blogspot.com. Go to these places, and if they offer it, get on their email list so you'll stay informed about the developments. And yes, as corny as it sounds, write letters or send emails to elected officials. These things really do make a difference. It makes a bigger difference, the biggest difference, to people that you actually have the legal right to vote for because you live in their district. When committees have hearings, make sure you find out about them. Try to take time off to go testify. Send money to these organizations and politicians. And here, as a final word, if you decide to write a letter to the editor, if you decide to place a comment on a blog, if you say anything publicly, in writing or otherwise, I encourage you to try to be civil. You know, there's an old saying that if name calling is your best argument, it's better that you stay out of the debate. I buy into that. As you can see, I'm not that kind of a guy here today. I don't call people names. It doesn't really help move the ball. And that's what we're about, right? Trying to move the ball. Well, that's all I had to share with you. This is a one-take production. I'm going to listen to it and see what it's like. Probably not going to change it. I wish I could have been there with you in person. Thank you for all you're doing as an individual. Godspeed to you.